Hey, I'm Dave Marks, the Spy Guy, and I've been feeling under the weather the last few days, but I wanted to come on here because now I have like some more information for people since people has decided to actually start watching this stuff. So if I sound a little off, I do have a little bit of a throat infection or something. It's a cold. It's kind of sucking. Anyways, I wanted to come back on here because I realized I should probably going to make 2 videos a week and just give general updates on what's going on, how I see it, combining with the historical stuff that's been going on. I really got a strong impetus to do this because I was had that shout out by Gonzalo Lira earlier this week. 400 people showed up on the channel. Welcome to showing up on this channel. And I need to actually start making content, especially to the guy here. I'm just going to look him up here. My new patron, I guess, from I had BDB1024, who's actually paying me some money. And I was just like, okay. So he's like, I will be supporting and subscribing to your channel. I have similar interests as you. So probably the best place if you actually want to do more support the channel is to go follow my link to my locals page. You can sign up and be a member for $5 a month, or you can give me a little money through the tip jar. I'm fairly comfortable in my life, but I wouldn't turn away cash. It just helps things go. He's a I have a similar interest to you. I have a dual history degree, former National World War II museum guy. Support Russia as well because we can't accept neo-Nazis, as Alex Christoforou likes to say. And I agree. That was kind of my turning point early on in the conflict when I was arguing with some people on this place called Ricochet, which is a conservative safe space. And someone's like, look, I just can't stomach the fact that I understand Ukraine is really bad, but I can't support someone invading the country because we can't be going around invading countries. And I'm like, well, rich from an American, where I guess maybe you are against the war, but hey, about being your imperialist powers. But the fact is that if you can't invade a country to get rid of NAZIs, when can you invade it, right? This is literally the bad people are running Ukraine, and we are just we're going to have to ignore that because Russia invaded the country. No, I'm of Polish descent. I have a strict hierarchy of people that I don't like based on ethnic and nationalist problems going back centuries. But for me, this hierarchy goes NZIs, then Russians, then and other groups, and it's just like I can't the the guys who literally want to exterminate you, or the guys who want to just maybe rule over you and boss you around a bit and make you pay taxes to them that you don't want to pay. But you got to look, if you look back in Russian Polish history, often Poland gets special rights and accesses to stuff when they're under the Russian Empire that even Russian peasants don't get. Just go look at the Treaty of Vienna or to see the results of that. And then Poland always goes around and revolts and tries to get free. And it's like, look, for me, I also realized early on, Ukraine is the thing the Russians and the Poles fight over. And that's why one of the problems I see with Ukraine, like I don't see Poles hating Russians quite the same way as Ukrainians do, because before really the start of the 20th century, really 1919 is really the only time Ukraine exists as a nation before it gets taken over by the Soviets. It's set up as a puppet government by the Germans during the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It gets when the Germans collapse, they have a brief period of independence before the Poles come marching in to help protect their Ukrainian brothers. And then the Russians come in and start the Russo-Polish War and push the small Polish army out of Kiev. And there's something like when the Poles marched into Kiev, no one bothered to cheer or cared because they were the 12th army that had invaded the city that year. So that's what we see. But Yep. I hope you can keep posting. You have a real chance to watch your channel grow if you're covering these topics. I hear USA and Russia will be meeting in Cairo to work out an end to the war. And how do I see it? I really don't see this. I don't think the Americans are really in the position to realize just how strong the Russians are, and they just will look at what the Russians will demand of them, and they'll balk and they'll walk away from the table, because our leadership class is not in the headspace yet that they still think of Russia as the country of the 1990s. They don't think of it as the country that it is today. When the war started, I was not really paying much attention to Russia at all. But when I realized when their tanks crossed the line, and was initially when I heard the Russians are invading, I'm like, oh, so they sent in 30,000 peacekeepers into Donetsk and Lugansk, and basically have told the Ukrainians, if you really want to launch this invasion that you're planning against the two republics, well, you're going to have to go through regular Russian troops. And that would definitely constitute an invasion, but not like what we ended up getting. It took me a couple days to realize that was actually happening. And because of that, once I did, I have what I call a black box in my mind. Sometimes I make intuitive leaps that I cannot explain at the time, but I later analyze and figure things out, and it can come up great in wargaming, where you can see what the enemy's planning, but you may not know why you're doing the situations you're doing. I remember once in a Vietnam miniatures game, and we ran into a group of our troops. I was a commander of American Relief Column, heading to rescue this base that's getting overrun during the offensive, and our column's moving along, and suddenly some of our tanks or APCs are hit by RPGs. I deploy a couple squads to deal with them, and then order the rest of the troops onward. I only had one airstrike, and I landed perfectly, but we got there and we rescued the place. And I turned to the player, the game master who organized the thing, and said, "Hey, so how did it think I'm going to get a medal for that?" He's like, "Dave, you're getting a promotion and a silver star." I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool." What? And he's like, "Yeah, historically, the guy because you correctly identified the RPGs were just a delaying tactic, and there was only maybe 4 or 5 guys there with RPGs. Historically, the American lieutenant ran into those RPGs, stopped his entire column, and then used his airstrike on the jungle where no one was actually there." And I'm like, "Oh, wow. Well, you told me I only had one airstrike, so I was only going to use it on something very valuable." But the commander at that time thought his personal life and that of his unit was more important than saving his one airstrike for an important target, for a more juicy target. In my case, of the last wave of invading Viet Cong. So, but I couldn't explain why at the time that I knew that the RPGs, or maybe I just gambled. But in the same way, I saw that when I realized what happened with Russia. It's like, well, if Russia is doing this, they have had to spend the last 8 years since 2014 hardening their economy, preparing for this, amassing troops and supplies, and all the other things that we have seen them come up with. And they're in this for go. You don't send 200,000 troops into the neighboring country without a plan, unless maybe you're the United States. But apparently, we then watched this massive sanction drop, and everyone thought that was going to do it, because the Russians would just fall apart like they did in 2014 when they nearly rolled over. But the problem is like, think of it like a football or a football game. You keep using the same offensive lineup and your offensive plan, and you run down and you win a Super Bowl. And then the next year, you make the same plan, and you're shocked when the other guy knows you, having watched you run that stupid plan over and over again, has taken steps to defeat your plan. And that's what's going on so much with this war. It's just that it just never occurs to anyone that we can't do the same thing over and over again and expect the same result, that the other guy would take any attempt to look at that situation, come up with his own plan, knowing what your plan is, and try to defeat your plan by coming up with alternatives to that plan. It's just we wouldn't run, or you wouldn't see NFL football teams doing this, but the NFL football team and general managers probably are used to getting their asses kicked more often than the United States and its allies, who haven't fought a real world war since really the 1990s. I'm sorry, overrunning Cobra 2, and like there was some hard fighting in Iraq in 2003, but there's no way Saddam was going to win. He he was out of place. Anyways, that's a whole other situation. But how he also asked, my new supporter asked me, how did I think this conflict ending? I think it's going to be much more like 1975 when the North Vietnamese overran the South Vietnamese, when the United States just was too obsessed with its own internal problems, much as what Europe's going to be also having with their own problems to deal with that. And just like, we can't afford to send any money because, our inflation's at 15%, and like we have bigger fish to fry. And frankly, you are out of troops in Ukraine. The Russians are just grinding through slowly and inexorably like a Monty. And that's actually the best, I think, World War II general to describe who we're up against. As much as I would love to see a deep battle or some of these other things, we're watching a much more of a Monty approach to World War II, whereas in the 2 years leading up to 40 through 42, when the Germans and the British seesawed throughout the Middle East back and forth, you never saw Monty ever retreat once during the entire thing. He would steadily advance his troops, controlling his supply lines. The Germans would launch a counterattack. He wouldn't buckle. They'd run out of their stuff, and they would retreat. He would advance. They would attack. And that is what we're seeing throughout this kind of situation in Russia. So I think that is exactly what we're going to see, is that we're just running out of stuff, much as I mentioned in the video title, the shell shortage of World War I, which is what partly brought down the Russian Empire. So what happened is that in the lead up to World War I, we saw there was a giant arms race where everyone was piling up weapons and supplies and trying to squeeze out the most troops they could bring up in a general mobilization. But despite all this unprecedented level of military buildup within the which battle is it? Anyways, the Battle of the Marne, where the French and the British narrowly defeat the German army, forcing them to retreat in a very similar way that some people think how what we saw in Kiev happened in 2022, or earlier in March, sorry. We're seeing the French did that to bail out Paris. And as a result, what started happening then and became much more apparent in going into the spring of 1915 was that they ran out of bullets and most importantly, shells for their artillery. So this led to a shell shortage, and which really stopped the operational tempo for all sides. And it really got bad, particularly bad in Russia, where they had it became like the catch-all reason why every offensive would fail is because we ran out of bullets, we ran out of shells. The shell shortage became this crutch for the Russian generals of why they couldn't win battles, except for Brusilov. And they got to the point in 1917, due to a bunch of economic misallocations of the rail schedule, where they were so obsessed with building shells to send to the front to be squandered by Russian generals, it led to revolution because they were sending more shells and industrial output to guns and that than to food to the cities, which whereupon the revolution started because they didn't have any food going to the cities. So it's weird that doesn't get talked to much about. That's the real cause of the revolution. Is not so much the defeats in the battlefield, which did cause some problems, but I mean, the Russians had basically beaten the Turks by 1917 or 1916. It was all over but the crying. If they had a little bit more support, they probably could have taken Constantinople. But there were defeats otherwise, and the Russians didn't have the pull. There's more. It was more important to the Russians to continue putting up pressure on Germany and Austria than it was to continue a more successful campaign in Turkey. Anyways, we have a bit of this, and now we're seeing this same kind of shell shortage mentality happening in of the early part of the shortage happening in the West as we run out of bullets and guns. As I've said in the previous video, we don't have the type of capacity to ramp up. We have all these people who still think we're the arsenal of democracy, but the arsenal of democracy is in China. We hollowed out our industry, sent it overseas, and now, or we've allowed a very corrupt level of domestic industry to come into existence where it's more important to keep high-paying jobs in select congressional districts and have duplication of effort than it is to have the shells necessary to support the Ukrainians or even ourselves. We're seeing this. Brian Berletic is very good on this on his channel, The New Atlas, where he talks about how every single aid package that goes to Ukraine's military aid package is smaller and smaller than the last. And even the reporters in the Pentagon pool are starting to have to ask questions because it's like they can tell that there's nothing, no more weapons, no more supplies, no more munitions are going forward. So yeah, that's the kind of the situation I'm seeing it right now. The biggest thing I could tell you is that for me, we still have to watch. I started doing this. I've been going on to 14-day weather report out of Kiev. And we continue to see next week, it's starting to talk about -6, -5 degree weather with snow or overcast. And until we get there, until that becomes constant temperatures of -5 degrees Celsius with a good long snowpack, it could be done without the thing, but I think that you want to have that big snow blowout day. And that will be the day when the Russian offensive will start. When they have confirmation, much as if anyone's watched the Longest Day, where they're talking about we have this narrow window of possibly good weather to land our invasion on. You're watching. That's what the Russians are doing. They're going to their guys, weather guys, and saying, "Why hasn't it snowed yet? Why hasn't it done this yet? We need all this weather to go break our way." We haven't really seen that happen yet. So in our last video, we were talking about the needs of American naval power. So I'm just going to kind of close that out because I can feel my voice starting to go. It's a little sore here. But I wanted to at least get a partial talking about what we saw. So surface ships are good scouting platforms, particularly equipped with helicopters and UAVs, drones. They're good with destruction with appropriate weapons. The U.S. Navy's long been just do they want to have harpoons, or they need other anti-cruise ship missiles, or do we want to fool around with the new railgun technology? Today, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are conducting missions off the coast of Africa and other locations. What can we expect? So for scouting, aircraft carriers have excellent advantages there. The best is maritime patrol aircraft in uncontested airspace. Surface ships are good, and submarines are particularly bad, except for you're the only ship that can go into anti-access areas with a reasonable chance of survival, or at least not getting into a battle. MIO patrols, everyone's bad except for surface combat ships. And most things are pretty good for combat, for destructive purposes. But the problem is that really what we should be seeing in the U.S. Navy is that, and this is talked about by Sir Julian Corbett, who I mentioned in the last video, is that an imperial power needs an imperial navy to patrol its wide and diverse holdings. The United States does not necessarily have a bunch of holdings in the traditional imperial sense, but they've taken on the British mandate of protecting the opening of sea trade lanes. And as such, sea trade lanes need to have ships that can open those things up. And we continue to see the Americans' obsession, their naval obsession with big carriers that can't be everywhere at once. What they really need, and this comes from too much of a focus from the Mahanian strategy of the big fleet. We will have one big fleet. We'll go out and defeat the other guy's big fleet, and then no, it doesn't matter who controls the seas because we have the big navy, and that's kind of like the very centralization of the American naval philosophy. They're still heavily uh, focused on that, and their refusal to really understand, even after this last 8 years, that they really are a naval power, and what they need most of all is cruisers or frigates with cruise missiles and a diverse thing. And you would think you'd want to have this because it would mean more guys could be captains of their own ship, widen it out, get it away from just having 10 aircraft carriers and the support staffs. But you need to have more and more smaller ships with now that we know with with modern cruise missiles with great combat power, and so that you can't. Churchill used to say this about Admiral Jackie Fisher, who was the commander of the British Navy in World War One. He's the only man who can lose the war in a day because he could go send out his ships and they all get sunk. We'll lose. And we see that with the United States of America. They have a fleet that they can lose in a day. And you don't want that when you have as many options that you're going. You want to have as many options as possible. And how do you get those? They're called cruisers. And I know we use the name frigates and destroyers and whatever, but the more ships you have, the better, because it takes 5 to 7 years and $10 billion to make an aircraft carrier, or versus how long does it take to make one of these small corvettes the Russians are making with a complement of cruise missiles that you can light off. That we are moving to the need for navies that can do that versus or have a fleet of drones on them than what we have there. Anyways, like I said, my throat's starting to go, and though I had more to say about all this stuff, I just wanted to get back to that, and I hope you like what you're hearing, and I hope to see more people come on the platform and help me grow this channel. So if you want to help it out, like, share, subscribe, and if you want to support, come to my locals page. And I want to thank all those people who joined us on Rumble. I've known a few people doing that, so this stream eventually will get over there as well. So thank you. Have a good night, and I will see you probably next week. Bye bye. And by bye bye, I mean, where the hell is bye bye?